Good morning, everyone. I'm Rhodes, the Director of Assessment here at SCC, and thank you all for joining the webinar on student learning assessment. In just as brief amount of time as possible, I'm going to cover about three main areas of assessment. There's a lot I could talk about, and it would take hours and hours, but this is an overview, kind of a 30,000-foot view. More training will be implemented, I hope, down the road here this year, where we'll dive into more detail, more depth of each of these three areas. But I'm going to talk briefly about what assessment is, some basic principles, kind of my philosophy, how we approach things. I'm going to talk a little bit about writing student learning outcomes, some things to be aware of. And then third, just kind of the assessment processes here at SCC, templates and where to find things and so on. And as we get started, I really need to say first off that the bottom line for assessment is to improve student learning. That is really what this is all about, is students and what they know and what they can do. So if we keep that at the forefront, everything else really falls into place. Secondly, assessment really is everyone's responsibility. All faculty, all program directors, department chairs, co-curricular as well is going to be coming on board for student learning assessment. So it really is a college-wide responsibility. And it really is part of what we do every day, what faculty do every day. You assess your activities, your units, your lessons, your classes, your programs. And what I really hope to do for how we approach assessment is to make it really not any extra work. We are doing this for us. This helps our students, our classes, our programs. And what you're doing is you're collecting evidence of what they know and what they can do. And you're using that evidence, again, to improve student learning. So with that in mind, we'll just get started right away. It didn't advance. There we go. This first slide is from someone at the HLC, Susan Hatfield, and it's something that I believe very strongly in. The key is doing something with the data, using the evidence. And I heard one speaker, a director of assessment at the recent conference, and he tells his programs, I don't need your data, you do. And I believe that firmly. I tell programs all the time, you're not doing this for me. You're not even doing it for Dennis. You're really not even doing it for the HLC. And if we do things not correctly, but if we have a process in place, a plan in place, and it makes a difference for our students, that's what assessment is all about. So this is not for me. It's not for the HLC. This is for you and your programs. And that's always been what I try to get across to all of our programs. So a couple of thoughts here about what assessment is. Key phrase in that slide is it's the ongoing process. We're doing it all the time. It's continuous. It's not one and done. It's not a box to check off. It's constant. And our process really is, again, to make it as easy as possible, user-friendly, to collect the evidence. I need to point out right up front, this session will be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be posted on the hub when we're all done. So don't panic. You'll have a chance to see this later if you missed something or want to revisit something. And then slides will be posted on the hub as well. Assessment really is about asking questions. And really the basic question is, what do you want to know about your students? What do you want to know about what they can do, or what do they know? What do you want to learn about your program or your department? And most importantly, how do you know? How do you know they're learning it? How do you know that they can do the skills you're teaching in your classes? It's questions. At the end of this activity, what do I want them to know, or this lesson? At the end of my class, what do I want them to be able to do? Or end of our program, when they're all said and done, what should students be able to know and do? You're collecting evidence. And how do you know they can do it? Through the evidence, through assessment. For me, philosophically, at SCC, this is about the programs. It's about the students in the program. You need to focus on those students and the learning first. What makes sense to you, your program, and your students? This is for you, it's not for me. The key principle about assessment is this: we're not evaluating faculty. It's about improving student learning. The college has other mechanisms in place to evaluate faculty. You know, the what do you think, the course evaluations, other surveys, and so on. This is about learning about your students. Sometimes people get kind of hung up or afraid of, well, my assessment results are not very good. That's a reflection on me. And really, in a sense, that's it's not a reflection on you. It's really good news, because what you're doing with assessment is troubleshooting your program. You want to find out the strengths and weaknesses about your students. And when you find something that they're not getting or not doing well, that's all right. Then we figure out, what do we do about that? As a result of this assessment, now we have more information about our students. So kind of in summary about assessment philosophically, it should be valid. And that means, does your assessment tools measure what you want them to do? You know, if you want to measure, you know, a skill in welding, maybe multiple choice isn't the best tool for that. So is your assessment valid? Is it really measuring what you want it to? The word reasonable really could be explainable. You think about assessment and outcomes, you know, they're posted in course syllabi. I've seen lots of other colleges post them on websites and catalogs, and I would like to see us do that. So any student or parent or an employer can look at your program's outcomes, your course's outcomes, and understand what the student will know and be able to do. They should be explainable to anyone. One of my favorite examples is the welding program. And Danny McCulloch writes excellent outcomes. They are crystal clear. I've never welded in my life, but I can read Danny's outcomes and I know exactly what they're trying to do. So it's explainable. And then you see all the paper. Assessment should be manageable. You can't measure everything. So you need to prioritize. You need to figure out what's important, what do you want to learn the most, and measure those things. I heard once somebody say, we don't need more data. We need to use the data we have. Because remember, what's the purpose of assessment? Improving student learning. It's not to write the report. It's to use the data, to use the evidence. How do we improve student learning? So then when you're thinking about, well, improving student learning, you'll hear a phrase, closing the loop. And what that really means is, if something in your results say, you know, we need to change some things. Well, what do we consider? One might be pedagogy. You know, maybe our teaching strategies here aren't the best. Maybe we need to give more lab time, we need to change this textbook. We need to do whatever. We need to change our strategy, more group work, more interaction, more ELE. Or maybe we need to look at our curriculum. Maybe it is the text. Maybe it is the supporting materials. Maybe it's whatever. Closing the loop means, what do we do to change, to improve the student learning? Student support. Do they need more one-on-one work? Do they need to have more interaction with the instructor outside of class? A little bit of mentoring almost. And then faculty support. What do I do as a faculty member to stay current? Do I go to conferences? Do I do a little peer evaluation, a little peer observation? I watch a veteran teacher, or I visit another institution. How do they do things? Maybe you assess your equipment or your supplies. You know, this particular piece of equipment is 30 years old. It breaks down. It doesn't work half the time. That is part of closing the loop and making a difference for student learning. And supplies and space. You know, we only have 10 welding booths. We need 20, or whatever the case may be. Conducting further assessment really means, well, it goes back to, remember, we're asking questions about students. Sometimes it takes longer to get the answer to your question about your students. So maybe you don't find it out in 1 year or 2 years. Maybe it's 3 or 4 or 5. And then the assessment process itself. When you look at your assessment plan, is the outcome written really well, clearly? Is our method, our tool, the right one? Is our benchmark appropriate? Not too high, not too low? So closing the loop could be the assessment process itself, as well as these other things on the list. The goal is to improve student learning and to collect things that are the evidence that's useful to you, meaningful to you, and then use that evidence, closing that loop. So that's the first of the 3 topics. Philosophy, what is assessment, some assessment basics. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about student learning outcomes. And the outcomes, a well-written outcome, those are the key to a good assessment plan and getting good assessment results. And an SLO, a student learning outcome, really is just tells you what the students can do as a result of the content, the teaching, the activities. That's the outcome. That's your expectation of what the students can know and do at the end of a lesson or a unit or a class. So to write a good SLO, here's the key phrase, SWBAT. Student will be able to. This is how it's phrased in the syllabus. It's something the student does. You can observe it, you can measure it, and they have to be able to demonstrate something. So when you write a student learning outcome, you start, a good way to start is SWBAT. And to finish it off, students will be able to action verb something. That's it. And the action verb, your friend and mine, Bloom's taxonomy, is what kind of level of thinking or learning are you after? Is it the knowledge base? Is it an application? Is it the higher order thinking? That's your key for writing a good outcome, is the verb. And they're going to action verb something. I've posted 2 on the hub, a Bloom's list, and I'm sure you've got other examples. There's lots of choices. Certain words for verbs that need to be avoided. One would be understanding. Students need to understand brake systems. What does understand look like? Or appreciate. They'll be able to appreciate art. What does appreciate look like? You need a good, clear action verb when you're writing a student learning outcome. And here's kind of some examples. On the left-hand side, some weak statements, and there's understand. The student will understand cell growth. Well, what does that look like? What are they doing? Well, on the right-hand side, they're going to explain cell growth and reproduction. The verb is the key. The students will know about brake systems. What does that really mean? What are they going to do? Well, they're going to service the brake systems, repair, rebuild, and then demonstrate knowledge. You know, I see this quite a bit. It's not bad, it's okay, but what does that really mean? What does that really look like? Well, the right-hand example is much more clear, much more strong. It's stronger, it's analyze. So writing the student learning outcome is the key to a good assessment plan, and then getting good evidence for what your students know and can do. So what I encourage you to do is review your course outcomes, your course learning outcomes, your program learning outcomes. How well are they written? And we could do lots of training, and I think I would like to do this more workshops on writing good outcomes. So again, this is just tip of the iceberg. When you write your outcomes, keep it simple. The more complex an outcome, the harder it will be to measure. The more complex, the harder it is to measure. So again, we can't measure everything. So pick outcomes that are important to you and measure those. Remember, students will be able to action verb something. In terms of different types of learning outcomes, course level outcomes, you are typically, in terms of answering a question like, what should students who pass my course know or be able to do? And then at the program level, what should every student who graduates from our program know or be able to do? And a lot of places have institutional outcomes. Right now we have our GELOs, our general education outcomes. So for an institutional outcome, what should every college graduate know or be able to do once they have graduated from SCC? And the course outcomes should align with one of the program outcomes. And those program outcomes should support and align with the institutional outcomes. They should all flow together. And we'll do some work here in the near future on mapping our outcomes, course to program and so on. A couple more thoughts on course outcomes. They're fairly narrow, of course. They are focused on the course. So let's say you're in a baking class. What should I be able to do by the end of the class? Well, I should be able to prepare a sponge cake. That's pretty clear. So that's a course outcome. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about a program outcome. Now, if I'm in the baking and pastry degree program, one of my program outcomes is a variety of desserts. That's pretty broad, but it's still at the end of the program, they should be able to produce those types of things. And one of those would be that sponge cake we looked at just a minute ago. Course outcomes measure near the end of a course typically, a final paper, project, exam, or something. Program outcomes typically measure, kind of the cumulative effect of learning near the end of a program. So that course outcome aligned with this program outcome. And that would probably align with an institutional outcome as well. That's where the mapping will come in. So we've looked at what is assessment, some thoughts on outcomes. What do we do here at SCC to make a simple, effective process? Most of you know our timeline, two or three main parts. Everybody in the spring typically writes their assessment plan. And the way I like to explain it is you plan ahead. So for the programs, when you made your assessment plan back in May, that plan is good for 2019-20, July 1 to June 30. You planned ahead for 19-20. Everyone's assessment plan includes learning outcomes, 2 or 3 from the program, 1 GELO. So you're measuring 3 or 4 student learning outcomes annually. And as you know, we have a 3-year assessment cycle currently. Manageable, 3 or 4 outcomes over time. And if you need to change that along the way, can you do that? Absolutely. This is not for me, this is for you. What's going to help your program? What do you want to learn about your students? So you have a plan that you wrote in the spring, Now the report is due, the fall, and you report back. In the fall, you're looking at the 2018-19 academic year. Report back on your previous academic year. And as we try and think about this a little further, what we did was we grouped the programs into 3 different groups so that the cycles were staggered, but everybody's on that 3-year cycle. 3 groups. And eventually, once we are using, and our goal is to use the Nuventive software for not just planning, but for assessment, our templates might start to look a little bit different, but the processes will be, the fundamentals are going to stay the same about assessing student learning. We may keep the 3 groups, we may have a different cycle, but it will still look pretty much the same. And our goal is to have Nuventive up and running for assessment by next spring. So a little sidebar there about Nuventive. So the programs, you're in 3 different groups, 3 different cycles. And assessment information, at least on the instructional side, is on our friend the hub. The red arrow, they're in the menu. I've heard people call that the sandwich menu. Okay. The yellow one, we are under currently employee services. Click on employee services, the green arrow, there's assessment. And there's the actual link right there as well. So that's where programs can find all of their assessment plans, reports, and so on. And again, the report looks back July 1, 2018 to June 30, 2019. When you fill out your assessment report, the best browser is Internet Explorer. Sometimes Firefox and the others give us problems. And if you remember, some of you had some issues even with Internet Explorer last spring. If that happens again, just let me know, or Stacy in Dennis's office. And everything you'll need to fill out your report is in your file on the hub. You don't need to upload anything, hopefully, cross our fingers. Once you're at the assessment site, look for the tab that says Plans and Rubrics Reports. Find the division where you think your program is. We haven't changed them, even though we've reorganized. They're still the old way because we'll convert when we get to Nuventive. Find your division, find your program, and then find your assessment report. And make sure the report you work on in the title includes 2018-2019 academic year. You're reporting back on 18-19. And as a reminder, again, some of that 3-year cycle information, if you're in group 1, and that's health and CIT, your 3-year cycle in your report covered 2016-17, 17-18, and 18-19. So you're at the end of your 3-year cycle, just the programs in group 1. So everybody always does an annual report, but for this go around, only group 1 programs do the annual report and the 3-year summary. And at the end of your report template are these questions that you see and that you can address to look back at the 3-year evidence that you collected and analyzed. So that's really how we do assessment, the process itself, trying to be as efficient as possible. You do your plan in the spring, you do your report in the fall, and there's your due date. About a month from now, you should have your assessment report completed, posted on the hub, and that's what the rest of today's time frame is geared for, is to get together and talk about your assessment report as a faculty. And I would like to see it become a regular practice where every fall and maybe at the end of the year, programs get together, departments get together to talk about where are we at with our student learning assessment, where are we at with our strategic planning, our annual planning. When you've got your assessment report done, I always have to mention, do a file save. The save as, I don't know what happens to it. It seems to go away. So that's how you do the assessment here. So far this morning we looked at what really is assessment, a little bit about student learning outcomes, and then the process of how we collect the information and enter it into the templates at SCC. That's the webinar portion of this morning. I sent out an agenda for program meetings to talk about assessment. And so everyone has a copy of that. You can get that from your email, and that's also posted on the hub. So a chance to review and discuss 2018-19. And what did you learn about your students? How well did they do? What were the strengths and weaknesses? And if they show some need for change in certain areas, again, that's the list we talked about earlier. And part of the assessment report is what changes will you make the next year? And then you can report on what was the impact of those changes. So I hope from now until 11 or whatever it takes for you, or if you need to meet at a different time, no big deal, but talk about as a group your assessment results. And then based on all of this discussion about assessment and the results, you submitted your plan back in May, but you might want to review that plan again. Review your SLOs. Review your outcomes. Do they follow that format, SWBAT? Do they have action verb something? Are they measurable? Are they observable? Do you have the right tool, the right benchmarks? Even talk about, well, who's going to do which part of the assessment coming up in 1920? And make sure you're ready to go for when that starts to happen. And if you can get into your report, hopefully you can start to enter results if people have brought their data, or if you meet down the road where people do bring their data, or whatever system you follow. Whatever format you follow is up to you. There's no one right answer. It fits different programs, and that's fine. You can start to enter your results today or down the road this week, later this week. And before I close, there are a couple of things I need to mention as well. We are into the Canvas LMS, and what we have learned about Canvas and from other folks, and what we would like to do using Canvas is to find a way, and Nuventive and Canvas at this point don't talk well to each other, but we want to find a way to use Canvas to enter your outcome data automatically. So stay tuned as we explore using Canvas to enter data for your outcomes that will flow much more efficiently than it does using our current format. So Canvas, more to come on Canvas, more to come on Nuventive. And then finally, we're going to send out through the IR office to everybody in this upcoming fall semester a survey on assessment to get a little feedback, questions or whatever about how we do assessment. And so stay tuned for that. Again, I mentioned everything is on the hub, that I posted the slides, some Bloom's taxonomy, the templates are there. And that hub link that I saw, full access to the reports and the plans, program directors and whoever writes the assessment, they have all the access. So many faculty may not, but your program directors do, so they can access that for you. If you do have questions, and there might have been some that came in this morning, Chris is recording this, I'll take a look at all the questions and respond. But anything down the road that you have a question about, let me know. There's my extension, my email. Happy to help. That concludes the webinar. Thank you for your time this morning. Hope you have a chance to meet with your programs either today or down the road. And once you do, take a few notes, send those to me so I kind of get some feedback on how things went to make this even better. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.